Hi, this is Chris. I'm here today in my first, actually my second installment of Pondering performance. And here with me today is the highly versatile and absolute all-rounder David Levi from New York, working in New York at the moment. So welcome, David. Thanks for coming.
Hi,
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're currently in New York. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the moment. What project are you working on?
Well, actually, I'm not in New York for work. Maybe interesting for people to know that because I'm in the midst of 4 other projects, that even when one travels, the wonderful thing about music, about many things, but also about music, is that you can continue to work wherever you are. So actually a large part of my day is taken up by work. I'm in a beautiful flat that I fortunately have access to with a grand piano. And so I'm pretty much at the piano 4 hours a day, doing scores, and then going to the theater, seeing my mother. And it's just a 10-day break before I go into a maelstrom of, I have a recording, several projects that are going into performance, including a musical which will premiere in June and run for 18 performances. So there's a lot going on. This is a little break, actually. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful. Which musical are you preparing?
It's a musical that had its first performance in Vienna. It's not known in English. It's called Rebecca. It had its first performance maybe about 15 years ago, something like that, in Vienna at the Theater in Wien. And it's based truly on the Hitchcock film Rebecca. Oh, okay. Also in a novel of the same name, but it is based, it's kind of a rock musical, but has some very nice melodies. And of course, the story by Hitchcock is incredible. It's an incredible story. So yeah,
it was on when I was in Vienna, but I never got to see it, unfortunately.
It's quite compelling, and this is a new production. So this is a production in East Germany, in Magdeburg, which will be opening in mid-June. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So as far as diversity goes, I'm fascinated, because you really cover the whole spectrum of conducting, chamber music, recitals, ballet, everything. And right. At the moment, are you leaning more? Do you have more preference for ballet, for example?
In recent years, I've really become more and more fascinated by ballet, and I've also been engaged to work on ballet. There's a certain aspect, I think, in any life, maybe I can only talk for myself, so I shouldn't talk for anyone else, that one needs also to sort of go with the flow. You have to pick up a wave. There's a wave of things that present themselves to you. So one can sometimes choose exactly what one is going to do, and sometimes one doesn't. So all of a sudden, maybe about 15, 20 years ago, ballet started to fall into my lap. And sometimes more enjoyable, sometimes less enjoyable. But with time, I started to gravitate towards some truly incredible experiences conducting ballet. And it's become actually something that I'm quite passionate about. So there is an element of saying, okay, this is what is coming my way, but there's also an element then of, once it's coming your way, of taking it and making the most out of it.
Yeah, very interesting. And a lot of I wanted to ask you, when you're conducting ballet, for example,
right?
How difficult is that as compared to conducting an opera, for example?
Well, it presents different challenges, very, very different challenges. First of all, I generally feel, for me personally, that having the line or the input of dancers or of singers, in both cases, these are things that actually help me. I find that conducting purely symphonic work more difficult, because it all has to come somehow from another space. Whereas when I'm doing theater work, I have certain objectives and goals that are very practical. Someone has to bend down and tie a shoe while they're singing a phrase, so you have to sort of, notice that they're tying their shoe and how they need to breathe for it. There are certain goals. And I find that first of all, that's just a general thing. I find that very consoling. I say it makes life easier for me. But for ballet, it's very different than working with singers. It's different input. In two different ways. I think that one of the major differences is that when you are working with singers, the orchestra hears the singers, and so there's always a balance between what the players. How can I put this? The players are never only doing what they're seeing from the conductor. They're not following like someone drawing lines. They're presenting phrases. They're using their feeling, their knowledge, their incredible knowledge, frequently more than what the conductor has, experience or whatever. But they're listening to the singers, and that's what I'm saying. So that if you go to an opera performance, the pride of an orchestra is that they know how to play with the singers. And then the conductor shapes it, gives impulses, which also changes the way the singers work. Whereas when you're in ballet, the orchestra can't see the dancers. They just don't know what's going on. The orchestra has no contact. They have their ears to play with each other, their experience of the piece, but they don't have the immediate input from the stage, which they do in opera and musical and operetta, which means that as a conductor, you are really the person driving the car.
Holding it together.
Driving the car. It's actually quite fascinating. And so that's one element. Another element is just the way dancers phrase is quite different from the way singers phrase. Of course, everyone needs to breathe, but the breath that one takes to start a note, to sing, is somehow has a different vibration or a different wavelength than a dancer who's preparing to take a jump or who's preparing to move. And that means that a phrase, which is sort of an arc like this, for a dancer, for example, someone who has small legs, the phrase is going more like that. And for another one, it's going more like that. And that ends the same phrase. So you are constantly being encouraged by dancers to try out different ways of phrasing. In fact, there's a sort of a terrible thing that some people say about dancers, that dancers don't know how to count, or dancers don't know how to do this, or blah, 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 blah. And it's ridiculous because they just have a completely different way of conceiving music. And just because it's different than what we learn in music school doesn't mean that it's not valid. It's actually very valid. And I'm always impressed at the incredible brains these people have, because they just can keep all of this stuff in their head. I mean, they don't work with a score. Everything is memorized and internalized, and it's quite extraordinary, and I think it's a real challenge and a real, I've grown more through working with dancers in the last few years than I had in maybe the decade before. It's really been, working with ballet has been a period of growth.
As you say, the choreography of the dancers must be very, very strict, of course. So they need the guidance, and you're the driving force in that case. Right,
and you have to figure out what it is exactly that they need, because it's can't always be expressed in words. We have, for musical language, we have all sorts of words we use. We use the beginning of a phrase, or an upbeat, or more legato, or it's a 3/4 or 4/4, and dancers don't think that way. They have other ways of expressing, and you really one works a lot in the studio with them to observing, The pianists who work with them regularly have figured out something. So then you hear what the pianist is doing, and you say, but I don't like that phrase. But how can I get what is the impulse that I need to figure out to make it a phrase that I like, but that serves the dancers? And in fact, dancers can do the idea that there's only one tempo. There's not only one tempo, of course there's not, but a dancer might say it's too fast or too slow, but that's not necessarily the way I would interpret it. I would interpret it too fast is that I didn't give them enough time to prepare, or too slow is that, you know, I'm not moving something along. Whereas if I took it at exactly the same tempo, but just kept it moving along, it would really be okay. So it's fascinating to try and figure out what they need. And it's very enriching. It's learning another language, and it's very, very
a real challenge. And with singers, as far as let's say conducting opera with breath control. I mean, obviously you do a lot. You do a lot in the rehearsals, or as with the correpetiteur before the rehearsals. So text and breath control is.
Well, it depends what you mean by breath control. I wouldn't have said breath control. Control is a very, it's a word.
Not a good word, no.
it can have good meanings, but it can also have sort of negative meanings. We can just talk about the breath. Yeah, you know, one needs to, but the breath, knowing where someone is going to breathe is one thing, but singers don't always breathe in the same spots at every performance. There will be things that come up, and, you know, exceptions and accidents, musical accidents and things like that. And so it really has to do with being empathetic. It's not necessarily knowing where they're going to breathe, but being with them all the time so that you feel their breath. And what I'm talking about is not something spectacular. It's what all musicians do. It's what one learns to do. It's what an orchestra learns to do. They all learn to breathe together. And I mean, the greatest example is when you see the Berlin Philharmonic, and they literally, you can see the whole orchestra sort of sometimes taking a breath together. But it is what all musicians ultimately do. And even the most non-professional, let's just say a group of people singing Happy Birthday, will, at a certain point, people sort of start to feel how everyone's breathing together, you know, and
unanimous breath.
And someone will break out because they're not professional or whatever, but it's actually hard. It's hard when you have that energy going around you to not be involved in it. Yeah.
I was watching one of your performances on YouTube, actually, with the Colombian Symphony Orchestra of the Eroica Symphony, and I was actually, this is what led me to want to talk about Schwung, because I think it was admirable how you maintained this Schwung throughout the first movement of it, and I enjoyed that, and you kept it going.
Thank you so much. That's interesting, because you had mentioned in an email to me that you wanted to talk about Schwung, and I was thinking, well, it's not always Schwung, but it's actually in that sort of three movement, da dee dee. There is truly a Schwung, and it's what I find so. That's my feeling, that it's a Schwung. Perhaps another person might feel it somewhat differently. But that's nice. That's nice that you say that. Thank you very much. And I think then the most important thing is one communicates in any interpretation. It could be as simple an idea. I would have never said Schwung, but it's your word. But you communicate that Schwung, and the orchestra takes it and they make something out of it, because they've all played the piece 1,000,001 times. You know, it's not like they didn't know it, and they didn't need, you know, but they take some sort of impulse and then they increase it, and then they add their own thing to it. And so it's like it's getting everyone onto the same page. And when people are on the same page, you have all sorts of miracles can happen, and they can be surprising. You know, it's not that every performance is going to be the same either. It's but you know, you want to get people on on a sympathetic vibration. Yeah, something
Yes,
like
yeah. I think impulse is a good word, yeah, for sure. And
impulse. Yeah, impulse.
that's very important. You know, as a
Well, hey, in this case, because it is a schwung,
swing and impulse.
it really is a schwung, but it is an impulse would be a more general, yeah, sort of.
Yeah, music seems to live from impulse. I remember I'm a lapsed Baroque violinist, and I
Great.
remember I had very good teachers that always said, you know, maybe you should go and do a course in Baroque dance just to understand all the jigs and the alemans and the sarabands.
Yeah,
and that was such good advice, because then you feel it. You feel this schwung or this impulse much
absolutely. It's interesting in Baroque dance, from what I've understood, and I'm sure that there's stuff that I don't get quite right, but that instead of feeling we so much, you know, a conductor's beat is so much you're going down, the downbeat is down, whatever, you know, and in fact, for Baroque dance, a lot of the downbeats are up. Everything's up and up and up. And it's just a completely different feeling. And that is just so wonderful. So it doesn't mean that I'm still not going to do a downbeat down, but the way it moves ahead is just completely different. Yeah.
And you started as I assume as a pianist. Yeah, you studied piano. Is that right?
Yeah, I started probably when I was about 5, just before my 6th birthday. So I was a pianist, and then later, when I was a teenager, I also took up the oboe, and I was playing in orchestras, and I did chamber music both as a pianist and an oboist. And at a certain point, actually, I had a hockey accident and broke my teeth, and that was an excuse to stop playing the oboe. So I had a time, and then I just continued with piano, and then I was also an actor simultaneously. So at a certain point, I stopped playing piano, and I was an actor, singer, dancer. And then at a certain point, then I came back to the piano. So that's sort of that.
Multifaceted sounds almost too mild. Huh? You've done a lot of things.
It's nice of you to say, but I actually think that these things are all connected, and I am not alone in this. There are so many. There maybe not so many people like me, but I'm not alone in this. And it's actually interesting. Maybe there are more in some cultures than in others, but there certainly have been on Broadway and in London several productions of musicals recently where the singers play the instruments in the orchestra. There's a certain producer who's quite famous, but he's done many shows such as Sweeney Todd Company, etc., where there's no separate orchestra. All of the people on stage play instruments when they're not singing. So, and there was a famous production of Cabaret where also the band plays and sings. I've noticed in the part of France where I live near Toulouse that you'll have a cellist who will all of a sudden pick up a microphone and sing jazz. You know, I think the most important thing is to want to express something. And when you want to express something, you can use different materials. So at one point it's going to be at the piano. At another point it's going to be with my voice, which is not very expressive today because I have a cold. At another point, it'll be with my body because I want to dance. At another point, if I dance when I'm conducting, that's not going to work. So I have to do it. You know, it's just you have to want to do something, and then you look for the tools to do it.
To express yourself,
express yourself, or to express. Yeah, it is a bit egotistical expressing oneself, but it's not just expressing oneself. It's entering into whatever that thing is and being part of it and wanting to be part of it. It's you could also say that it's not just me expressing myself. It's wanting to join. If I'm going to do the eroica, it's not my eroica at all. It's like trying to feel, what is this piece and what is it like when all these people have to play this together? That's what it is. So yeah.
Like that mutual feeling. Yes.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very fascinating. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think we may leave it there.